Hi, I'm Tanya Janka, and I wrote this book, Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. And in the book, you might have noticed that quite a number of times I promised that I would do online streams to discuss the questions at the back of each chapter. That's now. I've invited on a bunch of guests this week. I have a small correction to the guest list, so Alyssa Knight and Haroon Mir were supposed to be on. However, Haroon actually never said yes. And I was administratively lazy and didn't notice, and so it's not Haroon's fault he's not here. And Alyssa Knight had something come up last minute that's an emergency. I hope she is well. I hope everyone she knows is well. But luckily, last minute, Ray LeBlanc agreed to be on. So it's going to be Dominique Reto, Nancy Gariché, and Ray LeBlanc plus me, Tanya Janka, to talk about Alice and Bob Learn Application Security, Chapter 2, Security Requirements. So let's bring everyone on. And yeah, awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. I'm wondering if we could do a little round table and all of you could give a little introduction about yourselves. And maybe, because Nancy's right next to me, we could start with Nancy. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yes, so I'm a cybersecurity analyst for the Government of Canada. I do, GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance. So yeah, security requirements is something I do deal with quite a lot. I'm also, you probably know me maybe from volunteering to a bunch of community stuff. So OWASP DevSecOps project and Hack the Box meetups and stuff like that. So that's me, Nancy Gariché.
She does a lot.
Behind the scenes.
Okay. Ray, you're next, and then Dominique.
So I'm Ray LeBlanc. I get paid to do AppSec in my non-spare time. Work for a healthcare company in the Pacific Northwest. Let's see. I write a blog with my friend Aaron. It's hellasecure.com. It's hella-secure.com. So check it out. That's about it for me.
I read Ray's blog. I really like it. I recommend it. I mean, read mine first, but then read his. Dominique?
My name is Dominique Rigetto. I'm a French speaker, so I apologize in advance for my amazing accents. Apologize. I work in AppSec field for a company named Excellium, not related to Total. It's a French joke. Since so many years, I have contributed in a small way to the book of Tanya.
He's the technical editor. There are two technical editors, Eli Sad and then Dominique Reto. And Dominique was so great. He helped a lot in making sure that my book was correct. There's French comments in the chat for those that are listening later. So this stream will be available in audio only later. So if you look up Alice and Bob Learn on any podcast platform, you'll find us. And this video will be available later, basically forever. The plan is to have it as a permanent resource for the book. And theoretically, one day, aliceandboblearn.com will be more than just a landing page where we collect your email and then invite you to these things. But I digress. So I want to talk about security requirements. So when you build this system, like when you build software, you follow the system development lifecycle, which I'm going to annoyingly show you here. Okay. I realize that that's not really enough to see it. Thank you. Thank you, my amazing sound tech. So we're going to talk about requirements. And whether you do DevOps, whether you do Agile, whether you do waterfall or waterfail, depending upon what you like to call it, all the ways that you build software, you have to know what you're building. And you have to set requirements for quality, requirements for functionality, requirements for like non-functional requirements, and in my opinion, security. And so we're going to talk about some of the requirements that I say during the book that I feel that we should have in every web app. And then we're going to answer the questions at the end of the chapter together. And I'm extra sad Alyssa Knight couldn't make it because she literally wrote a book about how to hack cars. And there's a question about car security. So I'm just going to like be sad during that question. So you just prepare for that. So to start off, basically, the first requirement that I talk about is encryption. And I talk about what encryption is for beginners. But do we want to talk about how, so like the requirement I come up with is, I think that every web app and every API that is on the internet should be encrypted to and from, like HTTPS only. And I've had some people argue this less and less over time, but I'm wondering what all my guests think about this, because I have my feet stuck in the sand pretty deep on this. Like, what are the pros and cons of using HTTPS, which means forcing encryption on the data as it goes back and forth between the web server and you, the user? Don't all speak at once.
Ray, to you.
I guess I'm for it. It's a pretty easy requirement to meet in like modern times. Let's see. The con is that things like the Firesheet plugin from like 10 years ago no longer works, which kind of sucks if you're into that thing, but I guess.
Well, and encryption is so much cheaper now too. It used to be very expensive with latency and.
Yeah, and there's hardware, like I think most hardware like just supports it, and so it's faster. I guess before I became an AppSec person, like people actually had to care about like whether it was fast enough, if it was going to slow down your, and we don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. So that's good.
There's still tons of websites that don't do it. Dominique?
For me, in fact, I'm in pro moving for HTTPS because currently, thanks to initiative like Let's Encrypt and so on, it's relatively easier to set up HTTPS, I mean, from a certificate point of view. After, regarding the cipher and so on, you have initiative like bettercrypto.org or Mozilla SCCL configurator and tools like testECCL.sh that allow you to grab a configuration, a best practice configuration from people that are in the field, because crypto is really a job, a domain. And for example, in my domain, when I must do a crypto, I always try to use a standard, and I often ask a question to a colleague of mine she is amazing, and kudos to you, you will connect you, and I ask to her, what is the best crypto, what is the best algorithm, and each bunch of code that I write for client, I submit to her to say, does I have missed something? And for me, regarding HTTPS, I use these resources that I have mentioned to use HTTPS, and every time it's possible, we should put HTTPS in place using standard, but sometimes you cannot due to technical reason. But if you didn't have technical issue, you go into this way.
Cool. We have a question in the chat. I feel like I'm not giving Nancy a chance to talk, but
But they
Yes.
covered it, right?
Yes.
Like I feel like
No, no,
it's
no.
not even really discussed anymore.
I know it's kind of an easy thing.
Yes.
So we have a question in the chat, which I totally like. Thank you, Fabian. Should we force a failsafe and deny communication in 2021 when a client cannot resolve a TLS 2.1? I would say it depends on what your business rules are. So I used to work at Elections Canada, and they want every Canadian to vote, no matter where they are on the planet. And so letting a Canadian in another country that might not have a good connection to communicate to us and learn about, where they can vote and all that information, is that more important than ensuring the security of the connection to everyone else, like allowing backwards compatibility? Is it worth it? I think it really depends on your business model. Like for the SheHacksPurple business model, I'm like, no, if you don't have a modern web browser, then I know you're never going to be taking an application security course, and I don't have to worry about you as a customer. That's not like a thing that I need to worry about. I'm not trying to enable every single citizen. I'm trying to enable people that work in tech to learn more about application security. So my business model is different. Does anyone want to comment on
I'm totally agree with you. I will say, if you can achieve to support TLS 1.2 and 1.3, do it. But if your business is very important and you must maximize accessibility, connectivity, yes, allow also TLS 1.1, because TLS 1.1 is better than no TLS at all. So, okay, it's not the best of the art, but okay, there are issues, but TLS 1.1 or 1.0 is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fabien.
I agree too. Does anyone, well, I'm just going to do it. I briefly want to discuss Let's Encrypt. So this group in the United States decided that they wanted to make free certificates. So if you want to pass something over the internet using HTTPS, if you want to ensure it's encrypted, you need to have a certificate. And they're given by certificate authorities. And most of them charge you $80. I know, because I've had to pay that $80 a bunch of times in my career. And so Let's Encrypt came out, and they decided they would give them away for free. This was completely, like, in my opinion, this changed the internet, because suddenly someone that's making their own homemade website could afford to get a certificate. This meant people in countries where, for instance, like the cost of a certificate because of the exchange rate and how depressed or not depressed their economy might be, like it was a small fortune. Anyone want to comment on that? I mean, like, I think Let's Encryption is awesome, but
Yes, it's true that with Let's Encrypt you have access to certificate for $0, and in the past it was a high cost, and moreover with the I perhaps will say something wrong. So with a certificate with a high validation or extended validation that allow you to have a green name into the bar, if I'm not wrong, and this one costs a lot. So for me, regarding the cost, you can if you can use Let's Encrypt, or if you cannot achieve to buy a cert from VeriSign and so on, do it. But at least TLS with Let's Encrypt is better than none. For me, it's for do what it fits your business requirement and business need, because business first, security for me is only here to serve the business. Security for security, in my personal opinion, is not useful. Security, like usability, quality, serve a purpose.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat from Fabian. Could you share the standard configuration or configuration assessment tools that you talked about earlier?
In the chat?
Yeah. Do you think do you think so? One online tool or a few that I like to use. I'm a big fan of going to securityheaders.com. And it'll check to see if your encryption algorithms, well, it mostly just checks your security headers. I really like hardenize.org. That one's a good, no? Not that
In
good?
fact, because in fact, with online tool like, for example, Qualys SSL scan, it's great, no problem at all. But it requires that your site will be on internet or in company. Sometimes you have intranet site, or for example, you want to prepare your configuration before to release. And
Yeah.
so for me, I'm a big fan of testssl.org. It's a tool that are run on Linux, but you have Docker and so on. So it's very, very useful, and it gives to you an analysis of your configuration, and you can use the tool for internal or test your configuration. Okay, it's so on. Okay, this one. Okay. Okay, for me it's okay. I can open the seed to the internet. It's okay. And in fact, and it allow you to because you know that I'm a big fan of integration CI/CD, and you can add it into the CI/CD to constantly check that, for example, you upgrade your WAF, you upgrade your I don't know any network system, and you ensure that your rate or your configuration do not open an issue. But you can use SSL Labs, but for me, it's useful to have a tool that can be run on internal site as well as external site.
Yes. What was it called again? I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
It's due to my accent. I know that you
Oh,
understand.
okay. Will you put it in the chat and then I'll just share it?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
In fact, the thing that I will do is every time I mention a tools or a link, I will put it to the chat, because I think that for English native people, with the time, my accent will be a hell.
Yeah. I agree. Being able to check before you release things to the public is ideal for sure. The next requirement that I have in the book. Oh, sorry, Nancy. Did you want to say something and I just cut you off? No.
No, let's go ahead.
It's okay. Okay. Also, I just lowered Dominique's volume slightly because it was just so much louder than everyone else. And it's not because of your voice. It's just different computer systems are weird.
Okay.
And so if you're like, why? No, it's not you. It's your mic. Like my mic last time was super duper duper lower than everyone else's. And so we're just learning about how to control the sounds. And I wanted the sound tech to know I was meddling. Oh, perfect. Okay, so thank you for sharing that link. Okay, so the next requirement that I put Nancy? No, I'm sorry.
I'm
it's
not
just
talking. I don't.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
So the next requirement in the book that I have in order is that every input needs to be validated. And I know that this is to me, this is good secure coding practice, but I wanted to make it a requirement so that if we kind of to bring it up, that it's a thing that I think we should do, but also so that I could specify what I mean by input, but also if you put it on the list, you need to validate every input, and this is what I mean by inputs, then hopefully your app will have those things. It could also be in your secure coding standard and say you have to follow the secure coding standard. But I added it to this chapter because I honestly think it's the number one most important thing to make a web app secure, is just to validate every single type of input to your app. Because guess where the attacks come from? Inputs. Does anyone want to comment about my obsession with input validation? Because you can, or you can be like, no.
No, well, I would agree. I mean, even if you look at the OWASP top 10 and most of the recommendation, I think if you do input validation, you're covering a bunch of those vulnerabilities. So I think it's a no-brainer, right? And so much that, yes, it could be in your security requirements, but also in your secure coding guidelines for sure. Hopefully, having a framework that takes care of that as well. But definitely something that you should have, and that takes care about a bunch of vulnerabilities. But Dominique has something to say about that.
In fact, to be honest, I'm totally agree with you, ladies. But for me, for the developer, you have you should every time you should validate input as well as output, escape the output. But you have one challenge when to ask to development team to do input validation because often, and unfortunately too many often, when you ask. If you ask to a dev team to perform input validation, you must, into the requirement, indicate not how to validate, but what are the valid input, what are the character, what are the length, what are the if number or not, what are the encoding. And most of the time, if you didn't provide this kind of
Guidance?
if you didn't provide this information into the specification or the user story, dev team cannot do that because they don't know what is an official expected value, and even if they want to do a good thing by determining the validation, they can break the application. So for me, every time to summarize, every time you can do input validation, do it, but you must into your specification. It's so good because it's a right chapter. Into your specification, you must explicitly write which information are expected to be valid, expected to be provided in terms of content, length, encoding if applicable, and moreover, if you must manage sensitive data, you must specify which according to you and according to your internal rate of data or classification, you must write, okay, this information is, for example, GDPR related, so it must refer to an information in which you must handle this information. But we have a bunch of many interesting question and interaction into the chat.
Yeah. Gary says, on validating input from the database, I find it a little odd. Because if there's bad stuff in the database, then you already have much larger problems. I agree, Gary. But obviously, this would help limit the blast radius if it does happen. Yeah, so I agree with both things Gary said. So ideally, the stuff in your database is good. But what if something got through? Or what if there's another application that puts something malicious in there? Or what if you have a malicious insider that puts something in there? Or what if there's an API, like some other separate application that also accesses that database and it has been compromised? I feel like maybe we need to take a step back about like what types of things that we validate, right? Like, I think we should validate values from the database. I think we should validate values we get from an API. I think we have to validate every single thing that comes from the user. So if there's a value in your URL parameters, validate it. If there's a value in a text field, validate it. If there's something in a hidden field, yeah, that could potentially be manipulated. So I want to validate that too. Like, unless it's in a secure cookie, I want to make sure that it's okay. Like anything that could have been changed by the user. Am I missing things? Is there more?
You have a
Right.
pretty good list in the book, right? Of anything
Yeah.
that could be. But yes, definitely user input. But like you said, more than that, and anything that's outside, like you've defined it, outside of your application, anything that even if you trust, basically, anything that's outside of your application, you know the requirements, how to validate your input, and you do that. And you do have a list of values in the URL parameters, cookie values, configuration files, and database input. So yeah.
In fact, for me, it depends of the communication applications that you include into your trust zone. When I say the trust, I just want to say, when you will define the validation into your project, you will define the validation the security levels that you want to achieve according to your budget, the knowledge of the team, and so on. Different factors that will determine the level of security that you want to achieve, and so the level of checks that you will implement. So, and also the criticality of the application in terms of business and so on. So, if the application is highly critical and so on, yes, you can validate. In fact, you can validate every bunch of information that the application reads from the external sphere. When I want to say external sphere, it's HTTP, DB, file system, socket, and so on. But to make this time, you need to spend the time in a specification, it's in design, and so on. So it will have a cost on your project because security is not free, as I have seen, and so you must take decision according to your business, to your risk, and to your to analysis.
We have a comment in the chat from Fabian. I understand the will to validate everything, but in an ideal unicorn world where everyone validates the data for which he is accountable, then it should be enough. Yeah, if everyone did their job perfectly all the time, I don't think that me and Nancy and Ray and Dominique would have so much work to do. We could just go relax in the sun, just chill out. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I want to bring up two more validation things. So, what do we think of people using a block list, or sometimes called a blacklist, of things that you're not letting in for input validation versus doing an approved list? Like, these are okay things and they are allowed in. I talk about it in the book, and I'll go on and on, but I want other people to talk.
Right?
Yeah.
I guess it's my turn. So I do not like block lists personally. I mean, I guess like approve or allow lists are fine. Like, it's easier to define, like, if it's like a number or true or false or something like that, right? And it's like there's a set amount of choices that you have. It's hard to say, here's all the bad stuff in the world that cannot be in there. You're just bound to miss something. So like that's kind of where validation might fail, is where you're trying to explicitly stop something bad from entering, right? If you're using a block list or a deny list, right? And I mean, that's where other controls come into place, like output encoding, escaping, depending on what context you're putting that data into after you do stuff with it.
It's really hard to make an exhaustive list of what could be bad. It's really, really hard, but it's really easy to say, I'm going to allow A through Z, upper and lower, all the numbers and single quotes, and that's it. And if you've got something else coming, I'm not interested.
Yeah, and especially with Unicode, there's such a huge set of characters, and sometimes like one system doesn't play well with the other system, so like they get translated from like your application that can possibly handle all the Unicode characters to a database that might not be able to, and it kind of sometimes gets transformed into another character that may be a malicious character or something like that. Or something that maybe the application doesn't know how to handle, and it's fine in the database. So there's always weird edge cases like that too that you have to be wary of.
In fact, generally, I try to have a sequential approach. In fact, every time I can, I use approved list. Approved list in order to verify the input according to the things that I expect to receive. But for information for which I don't know the expected content, or I don't know, or business do not provide to us, in fact, I have no information about what to validate. In fact, I use a deny list because I cannot create an approve list because I don't know what I can receive. So I try to, according to the context, where the data, to do a deny list. Okay, you can bypass it, but it's the best that I can do with the information that I have. So In fact, I try to have a sequential approach, best and so on, in order to at least put a minimum level of security. But in all case, I try to go back to the business and say, okay, guys, normally you are the business master, so you know what are the data. Can you say to us which data can we expect? Normally, it's at this time, most of the time, has been fired from the business desktop, and I go away.
Oh, it's a good
Would you
point
say-
because I feel like allow lists have been best practice forever, and I don't. I'm like, are we discussing this? Why? I feel like white lists, allow lists, has always been what you're supposed to do. But fair point, Dominique. That sometimes if you don't have the requirements, that you have to do something, and so yeah, good point.
But also
And-
when
and-
I review code constantly, there are block lists that aren't working and I'm getting past them and I'm seeing holes in them. And it's not always because of like a special situation where for some reason you can't talk to the business or you have no idea what input's coming. It's just like they're just not putting either any input validation or they're doing a block list because they don't know because they didn't get taught that in school. Sorry to interrupt.
No, but it's fair. Like I guess what Dominique was saying is allow list is first choice, and it's what you've seen in the wild is that you see a lot of blacklists, but not because it's on purpose. It's not a conscious choice. It's just a lack of awareness and education, which is a different thing. Right?
Yeah.
But for me, I try to stay pragmatic when I do this kind of thing. I say, okay, which information do we have? According to that, which technology, which framework do we have? Can we have? And in addition, because we talk about input validation, but security is a teamwork. So okay, for image, let's take a case. I cannot do input validation. I cannot do because I don't know. Okay, I will try to say, okay, I will store the information. I will perform output escaping. At least if I have a payload, normally it will not execute normally. And I will apply defaults in depth, so right access level and so on, in order to minimize the exploitation possible for the issue. But I try to stay pragmatic and apply the things that according to the information that I have and the business of the application and the time to do it.
So would you say that we could prioritize? So like number one would be do input validation specifically using an allow list or an approved list. And then if you can't do that, then second, do a block list, but also add other mitigations. So for instance, sanitize the input, like remove bad characters or escape the input. So like take away its power. Right. And then also, what was the third? I think you said another fourth thing that you could do. So I can't remember now. There was like a fourth thing that you said that was good.
Okay. In fact, if you want, let's take sequences. So if a unicorn world, I will do the input validation using an approved list because the business provide to me the data, which information I expect to receive. So, okay, unicorn world, input validation using approved list. Second case, I miss some information. I will try to do input validation using block list. But for all case, in addition, I will try to I will add additional level of protection. In all case, I will add output escaping using context aware according to the and so on. So I will use output escaping, and in addition, I will use another layer of defense, for example, access level, hardening of the framework, and so on. In fact, all the things that I can add in addition to the input validation, because input validation is like output escaping. It's one item of the security chain. It's one layer of the application security onion.
Yeah, defense in depth, right?
Yeah. And you do mention that again in the book, right? Like that's for XSS.
Like 20 times. I know Ray was going to say something and he's had to disappear for a second, but like one more thing about input validation, because I'm like obsessed, is server side versus client side. So client side means in your browser in JavaScript, and server side means, you know, in your container, on your virtual machine, on your server, if you're like way back in the day with some bare metal, on your platform as a service. But like the idea of, I've seen a lot of input validation that's in JavaScript, and then I just use a web proxy and I'm like, oh, thanks, I'll just go past you, and then I'll put in whatever I want to. How do we get the message across to developers? Like if you want to put input validation in JavaScript, like to save time, because the average user is well behaved, and that will make sure that they know, no, you can't put 26 characters in a phone number. But like, how do we get it across to all devs that like, so in my opinion, it has to be, the final validation has to be done on the server, because we can get around JavaScript validation very quickly with a web proxy. So like, how do we get that message across?
I think that's education, right? Or getting your app broken, getting your code compromised. That helps to understand that it works. But yeah, like definitely use it client side to for functionality. You know, if you're entering an invalid input, you know, the user wants to know that they're not entering the right value. So I think on the client side, it's important to do, and it's a good experience for the user. But for security purposes, as you say, it's easy to bypass that. So don't use it on client side for security purposes, because it can be bypassed. It's not one or the other.
Yes. Anya?
We have so many awesome comments in the chat. I'm like, don't just read them all, Tanya. But yeah, someone was talking about output validation, and yeah, we can actually validate output. So that's actually the next requirement in the book is output encoding. So like anything that's going to go to the screen is going to be output encoded to make sure it's in the right format. But you can do more than just that. You can validate that the output is appropriate. Do you want to talk about it, Dominique? Because I feel like you're...
No, it's according to the previous question, validation on client side and server side. For me, I'm totally agree with all the things that has been said. I just want to add a little information from an offensive point of view. If, for example, you perform the validation on the client side and server side the same, for me, as an attacker, it's great, because I know the validations that you perform on server side, so I can work on a bypass in an offline way. And when I will trigger the exploit, I will pass, because if it's the same, I will work on my stuff on offline, so you will not see trace, tentative, and so on. I will normally not raise alarm. And when I will submit my payload will pass. So the thing that I propose, because I made always proposal, not advice, always proposal. It's to limit on the client side to do user experience validation. So it is a date, a correct format, a value must be present or not, and so on. But do not do security validations. Do, in fact, just perform user experience validation, and on the server side, perform the input validation in order to hide the logics that you validate. But it's a proposal, because you must find the way between the security and your usability on the application. So I have not a final single answer. So I will say, most of the time, I prefer to do the check on the server side and keep the user experience validation of the client side, to not disclose the validations that I made and allow an attacker to prepare an offline attack, because I want him to do some trial on the server in order to me to detect that I'm probing. So force me to make trial, and it's a way that most time I propose to the dev team. And just one thing, Ben talk about output validation. For me, it's not validation, it's escaping. So you do not validate on the output that the data is correct. On output, you encode
Encode.
your encode in order that, for example, if you return a tag, it will be escaped in order that when the browser receives it, for him, it's just a text. It's not a tag that he will interpret it. So it's just
Yeah.
precisions.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because the two biggest vulnerabilities that we tend to see a lot of that are super terrifying are injection and then cross-site scripting, both of which are sort of the same. Basically, it's like the attacker has gotten your app or your database or your operating system or your browser to perform, like to run and interpret its code instead of your app's code. And that's terrifying. And cross-site scripting special because it happens in the browser instead of on the server side or the operating system or whatever. It happens like right on your computer at you if you are the victim, and that sucks. Gary was saying, oh, just tell devs that any code running on the browser should always be assumed to be compromised, and then take out to the woodshed those that need additional education. Gary. And Ben is saying that only works if they're given the support, time, and assistance to do that. If they're being pushed to meet a deadline, they're fearing losing their job, then they're going to hope that nothing bad happens. I feel like quite often devs are trying to write the best code they can. I would say almost all of them are doing that. I wouldn't say that any of them are like, you know what, I'm going to skip input validation because I don't have time. I think it's just that they're rushed and they don't think about it, like due to lack of experience. No one else has pointed this out to them. They've never been trained. Like I definitely don't think that many devs are being malicious or intentionally skipping
Lazy.
security. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't really, because like anyone that would be like that lazy would probably already be fired because they'd be lazy in all these other ways. And the manager of the dev team would just be like, that dev really stinks.
But something that's been coming up again and again, and Dominique makes great points about that, is, you know, we're constantly as security professionals trying to prioritize, right? Like there's so many best practices, there's so many security requirements, and, you know, there's a limited amount of resources. There's, you know, we know there's one security person per 100 dev, per 10 operation people, like the common stat. So you do your best based on the sensitivity of the data, your business needs and things like that. So yeah, like constantly as a security professional, you're trying to prioritize what you need to do based on all these requirements. Yes.
And in fact, regarding the output escaping, modern framework like, for example, Spring or Frontend, Angular, React, and so on, have protection for this kind of things. Already have protections. So leverage your framework, and normally most of the framework possess this kind of things.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Whenever possible, if we can use the security functionality in our framework, assuming we're using a modern framework, right? Like, yeah. As usual, I agree with Dominique. Ray, now that you're back, I want to pick on you. Ray's like, I regret saying yes to this invitation. So the next thing in the book is third-party components. And this is a hot topic due to the SolarWinds situation. Literally every client I talk to is like, but SolarWinds at the end of every sentence. And I try to explain to them that they are very important, but not as important as SolarWinds as a target from a nation state, generally. But one of the requirements I have in the book is that if you're going to have third-party components in your app, and if you're a human, you will have them, because you just can't write an app without third-party components. Like imagine if you're trying to build a shed and you're like, okay, I'm just going to build the trees, and then I'm going to cut the trees and I'm going to process them into 2x4s. Wait, I need to go mine some metal, right? Like you don't build every single part. You go and you buy pre-made parts, and then eventually you nail them together, or whatever it is people do that build sheds, and then eventually you have a shed. And the same thing is true with software, right? Like even if you're programming in something low level, unless it's like assembler, so if you're using C Sharp, a more modern one like .NET, if you're using frameworks, etc., you have all this code in your app that you didn't write, but some of it has problems. And what do we do? I know you have opinions.
What do we do? Let the developers use whatever they want. You know, it's cool. So it's kind of really depends on the risk appetite of your company is going to be the answer. Some companies will let developers pick whatever they want, and other companies will kind of make every library go through a review process and things like that, right? Generally, what I do is I have a checklist that I provide my developers, and it's like it asks questions of like, is this library maintained? Is it like active, right? Have there been commits in the past like month or year or 6 months? I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember the whole checklist, but it's like, is the library being maintained? Is it a popular library? Hopefully more popular libraries are going to have less of an issue with people like injecting malicious code into it. Not always the case, but hopefully someone will catch that. Let's see. I mean, I think there's like 6 to 8 things on my list. I can't remember off the top of my head. But like, I had a thing of just like, here's how you pick a good library, developers. And one of the things that's on my list that isn't really a security issue, but it's more of a kind of legal compliance issue is like, is the license allowed to be used within our company, right? Stuff like that. So I mean, like it does get out of the bounds of security a little bit, but including like a GPL license in some cases may be a security issue because we might be forced to give over our source code if we're distributing those binaries or something like that, right? So. Yeah.
Gary is pointing out he did a yarn install on a web app last week and it pulled over 2,000 packages from NPM. Yes, terrifying. So someone was saying how people are worried about what's in the COVID vaccine, but those same people will do a curl command and just like install anything from anywhere. And it's like, I think you need to set your priorities. What about software composition analysis tools, Ray? Because I love your thing, and also I'm looking forward to the next Hello Secure blog post, how to select good libraries with Ray. But what about software composition analysis tools?
I always suggest them. It's always nice. The hard part is figuring out what to fix. Truthfully, with any tool, it's always figuring out what to fix and when you actually have to fix it. I think there's like a lot of pushback on like the CVSS scores. I think most of them are like 7 and above or 6 and above, which is basically like highs and criticals. So if the majority of them are highs, like, do they need to be fixed? And then it's just like who's going to do the work to find out whether it needs to be fixed or not? The general requirement that I tell my devs is keep everything up to date. They're going to get the security fixes, but they're also going to make the future upgrades from major versions easier. And I mean, they might get performance fixes, things like that, right? Speaking on the NPM stuff, there's a website called Bundlephobia, and basically it allows you to scan a package and tells you and gives you like the size of it and whether it's self-contained or like how many
Yeah.
dependencies it has, things like that.
That sounds cool. Can you look that up and share it in the chat? Because that sounds kind of awesome.
Yeah, I will do that.
A few years ago, I was trying to install the OWASP Security Knowledge Framework, and it was in a data center, like on a server where we were going to install it. And I was like, great, can I download all the dependencies so I can check it out? And they're just like, no, just open up a port and just let us download whatever we want to onto your server directly past your firewall. And I was like, oh no, that's not happening. And so there was much negotiation back and forth between me and the two brothers who made it. And eventually I was just like, I don't think I'm allowed to use your tool. I'm sorry. Like, I can't just download anything random from all over the internet directly into my data center. Like, that's just not allowed. We have some excellent questions in the chat. So Ben asks, can I have links to the blog post? I'm just teasing Ray that I want him to write a blog post, quite frankly, so I can read it and then send it to clients, because I am selfish. I want Ray to write it for me. Software composition analysis. So Fabian now, I'm just going to read his. So SCA, software composition analysis, on the app stack, you can scan containers too. So you can scan the dependencies for the containers. And there's hardening technical foundations with the CIS benchmarks also fail into the supply chain attack now. Wait a minute, what? I feel like this is like a really complex sentence. Yeah, there's a lot going on there in your sentence, Ray. Oh, and Ben is twitching, so that's good. But I agree with you, Ray, making sure the licenses are allowed for where you work, right? Like that you're not illegally using something that is like not meant for commercial use, etc. I totally agree that, yeah, if something's 10,000 years old and no one's updating it, and like, do you really want to introduce that into your stack if it's just probably going to fall apart and no one's going to support it? Yeah. Yeah, Ben is saying, but I rather guests that have blog posts that might be worth following. Yeah, you should follow Ray and you should follow Hella Secure. I really like their blog, and I'm not just saying that because I'm friends with Ray. I became friends with Ray partially because I like his blog. That's what nerds do, right? Like, your blog's so cool, want to hang out? Okay, so the next topic is security headers. And I'm thinking that's the last one we're going to be able to talk about before we do the questions. One, because I am obsessed. I am obsessed with security headers. So security headers are one or more lines of code that you can put into an app. Sometimes you put it onto the web server. And basically, it is an extra layer of protection against something. So there are a whole bunch of security headers, which I detail obsessively in the book, because I think they're really important. So the one people talk about the most is content security policy header, because it is the hardest. It's really difficult compared to the other ones. But I think that it's important to have multiple layers of security. So let's say HSTS. So that is, just a second, what does HSTS stand for again? All of a sudden I'm blank on it.
Strict transport security.
Yeah, but what's the H?
HTTP.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
HTTP, strict. Yeah, okay. So HSTS, which is HTTP, strict transport security policy. But the idea is it makes sure that your connection is HTTPS. So in case someone messed it up somewhere else, it's like it forces it. So if someone's like, I'm going to try to connect on port 80, which is HTTP, I'm just going to switch them over. I'm just going to force them over this way. I'm not going to allow those connections. And this is a check that you can do to make sure your stuff is happening, right? Like, this is what I want. And you can do this on your web server, but you can also put it in your code. There's a lot of things where you can do an extra check to make sure you're getting the thing you want. A lot of devs push back and are just like, I don't think I should have to do that. That's too much work. And I'm like, really? I feel security headers are important. Does anyone here want to talk about security headers? Also, Nancy, do you want to show any of my silly memes? Because I really, really like security headers, so I've made some memes. What do we love? We love security headers. Yeah, thank you.
So, so one of the things with security headers is like you can kind of group them into maybe two categories, like headers that can be managed centrally and headers that have to be managed like on a per application or like a per page thing, right? The ones that you can handle centrally, like the HSTS header, like you can just set that for your developers on the WAF, so they don't even have to do stuff, right? The more tricky ones are things that they need to that are context specific, that the developers actually have to know this content is getting served, so like it needs to have these
But
headers
you have
in
to
it.
list it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Content security policy header makes you list all your stuff. It's like if you're going to be using, like calling out to other places on the internet, you have to basically make an approved list of this is cool, and then it assumes everything else is not cool. And the number of times that I have seen what's cool, that's not what the setting is. But then it's a star. Like, no, why did you even use content security policy header if then you are immediately going to disable any value it has? No.
Because they want to have a clean pen test report.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's one of the reasons why you do that, right? You're putting it in for compliance reasons.
Yeah. But then you disable it immediately. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. How can we convince developers, besides making really cute Star Trek memes, how can we convince developers to use more security headers? Like a lot of them will tell me, oh, well, I'm already defending against that over here, so I don't have to do any work to do that.
I think my point of view is first, if you want to convince a dev team to use headers, first is not to us to them to use headers. It's a teamwork, because headers most of the time has not been set at the application level, but often at the WAF level or device, except the ones that it's specific to the application. So like the content security policy, because you cannot put one for the whole company, otherwise it will be a little bit a mess. So for me, you need to show some examples, so explain what they are, and propose them to add it through a framework, or add them, for example, at if they are a WAF, you can use it at the WAF level, or provide them directly configurations that can be used. So the objective, in fact, is to convince them by showing that it's easy to use, and provide them starting configuration and so on. Every time I do a web assessment for a client, and some header are missing, even with the time less and less header are missing, I try to propose a starting configuration, just to not say, okay, start from scratch, go do it yourself. I propose just a basic configuration that, so it's already it's permissive, but at least it's a start. So I propose a configuration, and using this way, I explain to the developer. I exchange. I say, okay, I try to show some examples. So okay, this is the one without the header. This is the exploit mitigation with header. And in fact, and in every assessment report that we provide, we have defined a section into the report in which you have a word description of the header. But in fact, and thanks my employer and my team leader, Fido Julien, everything that we work, we do not have internal referential. All the references that we use are OWASP. So every time we find the interesting thing, we do a pull request, a pull request. So in fact, we also provide, for example, a contribution to the WASP security header in order to provide tools and reference to the developer in order to provide them some stable documentation and so on. So, to summarize, I will say it's just convincing by helping them at the maximum possible by providing them pragmatic and useful materials, in fact.
Speaking of useful materials, I'm just going to share in the chat and put it on the screen now and then say it out loud for everyone. But I released the list of security requirements for free because I'm really not good at selling stuff, but I'm really awesome at giving away stuff for free. So you have to join my newsletter to get it, but basically it's a PDF with all the requirements that are in the book. It doesn't explain in depth each one, it just tells you what they are. So if you go to https and then newsletter.wehackpurple.com, and then, so here's the hard part, so /web-app-security-requirements. And I'll put a link in the show notes, which will be on Buzzsprout. Yeah, okay, awesome, Tanya. Good job. There's a couple of comments in the chat that were great that I wanted to read out. So does anyone want to tackle Fabian's question? Because I know the answer, but I feel like I'm doing all the talking, so. Ray, did you want to, or Nancy, or can I just bulldoze?
You can bulldoze. Go for it.
Okay, so Fabian's question is, can we trust same origin to protect us from cross-site request forgery, or is there a probability that we can be tricked somehow? So cross-site request forgery is an attack where, someone sends a phishing link, or you go to a bad place on the internet and click on some sort of link. And in it is an attack hoping that you are logged into somewhere, like let's say AliExpress, if you're me and you really want to buy shoes. Actually, I don't buy shoes there. I buy dresses there. But anyway, okay, so I'll leave it logged in indefinitely because I always am poking around. So if someone sends me an attack, and it could be buy this dress, but don't ship it to Tanya, ship it to me. But because they are protected against, cross-site request forgery, what they're doing is they're passing a token invisibly. So every time there's a transaction, they're like, is this really coming from Tanya? We know she's logged in, but it's weird. It seems out of place. She wasn't even on the site. So it checks to make sure you're you. And so passing a token is one way. A second check that you can do is to check in the HTTP response header or request header is the value of the same origin. So that's a kind of a variable that gets passed through. It's did this request come from the same place? And you can trust it because although it's easy to spoof it yourself, so let's say I'm a web app pen tester and I'm haha, I'm going to spoof it and change it to something else with the web proxy. You wouldn't do that as a victim of this attack. That makes no sense, right? And so because they're sending it over and it's going to bounce, it's going to open up in my web browser, it's going to put the real value in. And so I believe that this is not something that you can be tricked with, but does anyone else want to argue with me? Because technical argument's kind of fun.
I have posted some documentation about CSRF, and another protection that is really good. In fact, CSRF is effective when you have a credential. In fact, credential, but elements carrying your identity, for example, like a key, that is automatically sent by your browser. So if you use cookie, an interesting thing that can be helpful, it's the new same site attribute for the cookie, because it will, depending on its configuration, I have posted a link to the Modia documentation about it, and it can allow you to protect your cookie carrying your identity to be sent when the user is not on the current site that issues a cookie. It's depending on the configuration. So it's one protection that can help you, because, for example, if you use a bearer, For example, you have a single page application, you receive a GWT to a token, an access token, and you store it into the local storage, and at each request, you read it from the storage and you add it into the mirror. Normally, you are not exposed to the cross-site request forgery, because if someone abuses a request, your browser will send the request, but it's not a cookie, so it will not trigger the code that will add the token to the header. Normally, you are not exposed. But you are, in terms of CSRF, you have many protection. For example, in Angular, if I'm not wrong, you have a feature that if the framework see a cookie name, I don't remember. I think that is X dash CSRF. It will add it at an header and so on. So you must manage it on the server side. But to be honest, most of the server-side framework support CSRF protection out of the box. So most of the time,
It's awesome.
Spring,
It's great.
ASP.NET,
Ruby.
also Ruby, and so on. So leverage as much as possible your framework, and normally it will be okay.
Dominique and I agree a lot on things. Thank you. So I was hoping, literally, I could talk about this chapter all day, but I was hoping we could go into the exercises because it's been past an hour. Is that cool? So
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first question, and so this is on page 63 of the book, because this is a 45-page chapter because of my love for security requirements. But anyway, okay. So the first question is, list 2 or more security requirements for a web app which we didn't already list. If anyone in the chat wants to try to answer, like what could be a web app security requirement that you would want? Or anyone that is a guest, you can list them. I mean, I list a whole chapter of them. We didn't even talk about all of them, but what would you want to add?
I would say, so generally what I do is, or what I did at my current company is I basically took the OWASP application security verification standard and basically looked at our maturity level and what we were able to handle, and then looked at the requirements or the verification steps that they said, and then I basically took out a significant chunk and made them best practices because we weren't there yet from a capability standpoint. And then the rest were reworded into requirements. So instead of it says like verify that something, it says like it would be changed to like basically like this must happen kind of wording.
Yeah. I like it.
So there's a lot of security. I mean, there's like a couple hundred in the ASVS. So naming
ASVS,
2 out of that is quite a bit. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
But there are also like there are levels to ASVS, right? There's level 1, level 2, level 3, depending on the sensitivity of your application, right? But they say level 1 is basically every web app should have those security requirements, and they try to make those security requirements testable as well, right? From a black box perspective. So those are a good list to start with. But like Ray said, and you know, the project leader of ASVS, it's not a list that you copy and you have to take exactly as it is. You know, you can customize it based on your needs and on your team and your maturity. So definitely what Ray said is totally relevant. For me, what I added based on your answer, one of the ASVS requirement was verify that anti-automation controls are effective. So basically, they were talking about having kind of clipping levels. So how many password reset can you do in an hour, right? Like just, I think your answer in the book was 1 per 24 hour. It might not, for some application that might be okay, but you also don't want to affect your, the availability of your app. The availability, I think it happened, for eBay,
Canada
where
Revenue Agency.
really, but for eBay when there were you wanted to win
Oh yeah, you want to win an auction.
an auction, and then you block your opponent by saying, well, you can't log in anymore, right? So that might not be yeah. And if he has one chance per 24 hours to reset their password, that's not, that's great for security, but for availability for a site like eBay, that's not great, right? So
Oh,
clipping
yeah.
levels based on your requirement, your use case, your business logic
Oh, I love that.
are good.
With CRA right now, what's happening is they want you to have a token, basically it's 6 numbers, and they physically mail them to you. But if you don't have those numbers, you can't log in. And then, so you have to phone them to get the numbers. You can't ask for them electronically. And I spent 9 hours last month trying to get those numbers, and then had to wait a week, and then could finally get into my account to hear, because they'd sent me a message, and the message was really dumb and not important. And I was just like, oh! So they denial of service themselves.
Yeah.
I have so
But-
many feels.
I would say, to protect your financial information, that might be, it's not the
Yeah.
great usability, and they could probably find a better way, but I see why they would do that and not eBay, for
Yeah.
example, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. So Fabian had a really good one in the chat. So a requirement could potentially be tokenized action names to catch every failed attempt to bypass our access controls. And so when Fabian says it's A5 and A10 in one shot, he means, I'm assuming he means from ASVS, or would we say from the OWASP top 10? 5 and 10.
I think that's from the OWASP top 10.
Top 10, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. But yeah. So we have more comments on Nancy's awesome. I love your requirement. So Nancy's point here, I think, is really important. If you have to be able to test all of this stuff, otherwise you'll never know when an errant commit has broken the config or removed a header or something. I feel like that's another awesome point that Nancy made, but not this one. Oh, but then a bunch of people are just saying Nancy's awesome. I'm like, yeah, I know. I know
Keep
Nancy's
them coming.
awesome.
Yeah, I need them.
And more anti-automation, learning client behavior would be nice with machine learning to prevent credential stuffing, but would that be legal? Oh, that's an interesting thing. I think that the average app development team just doesn't have the money to add all of that just for this. That seems more like it would be an additional security tool or something.
Yeah. Well, and there are contextual things that you can do for authentication, right? Like if you're not in the right region, even Discord does that, right? Like if you're trying to log in from Montreal, and if they expect you to be in Ottawa, they'll say, well, there's something's off.
Like, hey,
so-
Nancy.
Where are you?
In fact, it's really a teamwork, because the dev team do a part of the work, but you have also the security operations center, or the security team that monitors the application from a security point of view, and the client behavior. It's also a thing that that can raise some event that can be catched by the SOC. In fact, so you can for example say, okay, I have a Dominique that come when he use the application. He come from, for example, Luxembourg with a Firefox on the Windows. Okay. When we see on a month, every time he come from Luxembourg or from Luxembourg or Belgium or France, but using a Firefox and Windows, and okay, he come from Germany with a Chrome on Linux. Whoa, okay, I will not block it because I do not want to block the business, but I will send it an email or SMS to say we have detected this kind of thing. It is normal. If it's not, contact your support and so on. But in order to allow a user to take action if something is not wrong, so you didn't block the business. So okay, if it's okay, let's go on. Mm-hmm. If it's not, if there is an issue, a user is able to contact you to say, okay, we have an issue. So the time frame at which the attack is pending normally it's much lower than if you didn't have detected it. So it's a reason that I think that it's really a teamwork between the different team, different dev, ops, security, and so on. For me, DevSecOps, it's a single team. It's a different people with different kind of skills at the same level, but they need to work together because every people have something to add, to bring for the security of the product. So and into this case of client learning, it's also interesting to involve the SOC and perhaps the business in order to understand what is possible, what is not possible from a business point of view.
I want to note that Dominique stole mine. So that was literally what mine was going to be. I'm like, damn.
Yeah. Well, I stole two more for passwords from ASVS. You know, one, and those are not, you know, mandatory, but they help users do the right thing. Like verify that a password strength meter provided to help user set a strong password, right? So having some kind of visual cue saying, well, the password that you selected is pretty weak, helps a user know that, you know, they need to do better. Or letting them using space or emojis in their password as well, right? Or requirements that you can add that can help make your password more secure without, you know, they're not necessarily like, well, I think they were level 1 controls, but you know, you don't see them all the time, but those are things that can help your users do the right thing.
Nice.
I love ASVS, sorry.
I know, right? It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh, we should share a link to ASVS.
Yes, yeah. Well, mainly, like, not to use them all, like I was saying, but mainly because I work with a lot of different framework or standards, like, I find that it's written in English and you can actually understand what they want, you know? Like, as you know, you've worked in the Canadian government, we use that ITSG 33, and reading that thing, you're just like,
It's,
you know?
It's extremely limited for app security. It is extremely limited.
First of all, limited, but also understanding, you know, like I've had meetings where you're with a dev and you're like, I think that's what it means. And they're like, I think that's what, like, something different. And we're like, well, you know, let's figure it out together. So for clarity, I love ASVS. So, anyways, I'll put a link in the chat.
Cool. So Gary mentioned, so briefly Fabian was talking about, you know, if we're going to watch people's movements and learn their behaviors and using our app and then blocking them if they're doing like behaviors we're not expecting. Gary says, in regard to the legality of building models on user behavior, it is legal under GDPR as long as it's purely for system protection purposes and it does not contradict what you stated you were going to use that data for in your privacy policy. Score. Gary and I have talked about GDPR a fair bit. So thank you so much. So Fabian adds one that is in the book. Stop preventing users from pasting passwords, because then this prevents them from using their password manager. And we should let them paste because we want them to use password managers. Yes. And I'm just going to put ASVS up here. Okay, so the next question is the question where I was really looking forward to having Alyssa Knight here because it's about cars and she is about hacking cars. So the question is, for those listening, list 2 or more potential security requirements for an operating system in a car. And I'm going to be super lame and just say ones that could be on any operating system. And I would say FIM and application security controls. So file integrity monitoring has to be a part of the car or a part of the operating system. And then also application security or application controls. So sometimes called application waitlisting. Basically, just don't let anyone install any new files or any new apps onto your car. Like, period. No. You don't need to install Spotify in your car. Or a random thing that's not in the App Store. Don't jailbreak your car. Anyway, does anyone else want to? Dominique is saying enable the debug mode. Does anyone
do
else
that.
want to? Yeah. Does anyone else want to add like potential car operating system security requirements that we could add?
Maybe that's like I've never hacked a car before,
No, me
but I
neither.
imagine that I wouldn't want my like Linux operating system like the console to be able to affect like my brakes, like it shouldn't be able to affect critical systems that need your car, like safety systems, me turning the wheel, stuff like that. It shouldn't be able to turn off my car. Like, at
Yeah.
least I hope so. But I would like to see that. But then again, I do not know a whole lot about how operating systems in cars work or anything like that, so maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part.
I I have so many thoughts, and this was supposed to be a quick question, but then the more I think about it, the more I get like kind of excited about it. And I saw Charlie Miller, and I can't remember what his hacking partner's friend name is, but they are the two who hacked the first car and like got it to stop on the highway. That is terrifying. Yeah, I don't think that any of the functionality of the car should be attached, like any of the safety functionality should be controllable whatsoever from the computer in the car. Like airbags, no. That is a thing I really want to have happen. Or for instance, like seatbelts. If a seatbelt could undo like electronically, no. I want a physical thing that no computer can connect to, that like the only problem would be that I forgot to put it on, which I don't forget because it's like habit. I don't even think about it now. But yeah, unless anyone else wants to add anything more to cars, I have many more silly questions for you.
Nothing for car. But Fabien says a driver is necessary.
Yes, I think that's a requirement. And also, someone is saying, yeah, don't do patching reboots while you're driving. Yeah, I agree completely, DJ. Okay, so the next question is about smart toasters. So, what could be some security requirements for a smart toaster? So, I would say a security requirement or safety requirement would be it can never go above this temperature, period. No.
Or that it stop if it's, yeah. Well, that's the same requirement, yes.
Or that it could sense if it's on fire. Because, like, what if it doesn't go above that temperature, but then it just keeps cooking your toast for a really long time, and then your toast becomes a small bonfire?
Not good.
Not good.
Yeah.
What if the smart toaster operating system could self-isolate? Like, if whenever I'm like working with companies and they almost always have like one or two legacy apps and it's like super, super, super awful. And I'm like, oh, let's do network segmentation and like put a firewall around it. Like, could the smart toaster come with a firewall? Like, is that a thing that we could, like a firewall around itself? Like, I know I suck.
But I want my smart toaster to interface with my smart washer and dryer combo. So
So that you can have toast while you're doing laundry?
exactly, like that just makes sense to me.
So Gary says people who buy smart toasters need to revisit their life choices, not just security requirements. And Dominique says, you can't connect it to the internet. Yeah, I would like that.
But is it smart if you can't connect it to the internet?
Yeah. Smart toaster. An IoT device means it's internet connected, for better or worse.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think of the incident. Was it at DEF CON that smart temperature, smart tool basically was the reason for a breach. So like you were saying, like isolation, but you're not only trying to protect your toaster, right? If it gives you access to your network and other potential data, and like I guess the toaster is the least important, and your toast is the least important things.
Yeah.
Is can it be a vector for a privilege escalation, for example?
Yes, in Vegas, I think that was potentially the smart thing. It was a smart aquarium. And they had hacked the aquarium and then got into the internal network of the casino, and then I believe they robbed the casino. And damn.
Yeah.
DJ has a really great requirement connected to the home fire alarm system. That seems actually really smart. If you're going to have a smart toaster, have it connected to the fire alarm system so it can set off the fire alarm if it sees its temperature is too hot and it can't slow it down. Kellen says, have a security requirement where it throws itself outside your house in case it starts burning your cabinets. I like it. Imagine it just like pops up and goes out the window. It's like, what? But I think that's actually really good. Okay, so the next requirements one is list 2 or more potential security requirements for an application that handles credit cards.
Well, it's PCI requirements, right?
Yeah, it needs to be PCI compliant. Good job, Nancy. Number 1 requirement. And some of their requirements are that the devs have to take secure code training every year, that you have to label the credit card data as sensitive data, that you have to limit access to that sensitive data. Yeah, PCI. Basically, I would say Nancy's requirement could be like all the requirements.
Yeah.
I would add a requirement that the incident response team is notified that there is a new application that handles credit cards so that they could put it on their list. Because when you respond to a security incident, immediately it's like, is there sensitive data in there or not? Like, are my pants on fire or am I just stressed? Dominique has come up with, do not store the credit card info in the database in the clear, must be encrypted. Yes, I totally agree with this. That's good. I like it. I did feel like putting DJ's backup connected to the home fire alarm system, but I don't want to confuse anyone with my silly, cheesy jokes.
I have a story with a customer. We have several years ago, we have made an audit for him, and we have found all the information of credit card in clear text in DB. And I was not aware about PCI DSS. I asked to the client, it is normal that we have access to your credit card and so on. Okay. It is a problem. Little bit, I think. And when I have raised the issue to my manager become white. It become to be scared. Oh, it's a mess.
Yeah. Imagine all the shoes you could have bought. Just kidding. Theft is bad. but you easily would be able to take that data, right, and commit crimes like robbery, right? Or you could sell those numbers on the black market, there's lots of things that could go very, very badly with that situation. Okay, so the next question is, which security requirement is the most valuable in your opinion, and why is it the most valuable one to you or your organizations? And so you can pick any security requirement you want for this, but mostly just like, why is it important to your org? And since I wrote the book and I put one of them as number 1, I think input validation, like making sure you validate every input and that you reject everything that's bad, I would say that that's my most important security requirement, because that's what I see causing the most problems the most often and the most serious problems. So that one's mine, but anyone else is allowed to pick it as long as you explain it.
I put 2FA or MFA as, I feel like it's one that can prevent a lot of things. But with that question, that made me think of something that we do in the government and probably everywhere else, but it's probably called something different as SOS, right? A statement of sensitivity when you start a project, right? When you even talk in the book, we have a a kickoff meeting. It might not be the first meeting, but very early on, you ask the project team, what kind of data are you going to process, and try to get information. Not only, yes, you'll want eventually to get an understanding of what they're trying to build, but get a sense of how confidential it needs to be, how available does it need to be, and what do we care about the integrity of the data. Get a sense of these things first, because to me, selecting security requirement, I need that information first, and that guides us for the rest, right? Why pick a requirement if the data is not valuable and it's more expensive than the actual data? So I think for security requirements, for me, it starts with that kind of document with data classification, not only for confidentiality, but for integrity and availability. There's probably a different name in the US.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. I feel like can I pick Nancy's? There's like a couple. Yeah, I know, right? Too late. There's a couple that are in the chat before we ask Ray. And so Dominique's was having security requirements that explicitly present in the technical specs or user stories. Because if they're not in the same place as the rest of the requirements, like what are you going to get? Not what you want. And then Gary says he would say really strong alerting. Yeah, I really like that. You can't avoid everything, so if you can improve your ability to detect it, that's awesome. Yeah, I agree, Gary. And someone else was saying precise and accurate accountability with good NTP synchro. What's NTP? I feel like...
This is it.
NTP is for the time, I think.
Time.
Oh, okay. Yes. With good time synchronization. Oh, I've run into this before. Yeah. So already in PCI and DSS with file integrity monitoring and everything, but making sure that your time is synchronized seems actually like more complex than we realize sometimes. Yeah. Okay. So anyone else want to add their favorite security requirement? And then I was thinking we would do what our key takeaways were that we wanted to offer the audience, and then we would sing Kumbaya, and then, no, just kidding, and then we would say goodbye.
Isn't there one more question at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one more question. Oops. Yeah.
I would say for really quick, I'd say the most valuable security requirement really is dependent on whatever app you're doing. Like for a brochureware app, the most invaluable is going to be different than like the HIPAA data that I have. But in general, like auth in, auth Z, authentication, authorization controls, and requirements around those are generally the most important for me because of the data that my company handles. That stuff is for certain people's eyes only, and having strong controls around that is very important.
I like it. Dominique, did you want to add another one? Or, yeah, yours was really good. DJ has added more frequent user-based security training for awareness. Yeah, I agree with that too. I'm super biased because I run a training company, so obviously I think that's the best. But I do believe that education is like a big part of us solving the problem. Okay, so the last question. If you had to remove one of the requirements from this chapter, so if you haven't read the chapter, this might not make sense to you, and that's okay. But if you had to remove one of the requirements from this chapter for a web app, what would it be and why? And I would remove HTTPS only because I know that they would put it back in. And I know that's a trick answer, and I'm a jerk. Who else thinks like a thing that they would be okay with sacrificing?
I would remove input validation just to make Tanya angry.
I was like,
No. So the one thing that I would say on this question that kind of that makes the most sense to me is that not all apps need the same amount of security for your company. So like a brochureware site versus a fully functional like admin panel that has a lot of functionality and features that can like really wreck your stuff, right? You really have to just weigh all of that into account and weigh the risk. So it's okay to remove security requirements for business reasons every once in a while if there's good business reasons and justification to do so. But you just have to remember that, like, also when you're coming up with your security requirements, like your security standards and policies, try to keep them more general than very specific. You're gonna the more specific you get, the harder it is. Like, devs are always going to have weird use cases, and they're going to be like, well, like, you have this one requirement, and like, we don't even have file uploads. Like, how this is not applicable. That's the question I get all the time. So it's like, well, then just ignore that section, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Just be very cognizant on like how specific you get and how prescriptive you get when creating those security requirements. And like, it's also, like I said, it's also okay to remove security requirements based off of business justification. But it's just like, how important is that security requirement to, like, how effective that security requirement is versus like how much work it takes to implement the security requirement is a good way to think about whether that security requirement is going to be in place. Because if it's a lot of work with like very low yield and security, like maybe that's not going to be a requirement for that particular app, or at least at first. So just something to think about.
Totally
agree.
agree. Totally agree. In fact, the things that I often see, see in my job, I see a security team or doing a security requirement, very, very generic, and that's not really useful for the DevOps team. So for me, when I see, and perhaps it's me that I'm wrong, I do not pretend to have right, and far from it, but I hope in the future to see security people in the company be more, I will say, pragmatic, and do not to offend anyone, but more to be pragmatic and provide pragmatic stuff to the dev team. For example, provide, if you want security requirement regarding input validation, provide clearly the things that need to be validated. If you want to implement a file upload, provide the file format that you want to support, and do not be afraid to make some mistake, to say, okay, we have a plan to add the PDF, but we have forgotten to support the, I don't know, doc. Okay, we can add in the future release. So I hope to see in future security teams and security people into the company be more provide more usable stuff to the team, and provide more closest support, because unfortunately I often see dev teams and dev and ops teams that are completely lost, and they are very amazing guys and girls, and they receive a document, implement security, but do not have more information about to do that, and they are led to themselves to find a way to achieve this kind of thing. So if you can. For me, if you want to keep one sentences from my humble me in this evening, if you create security requirement, as like Ray has said, do it in a way that it is very applicable by your your technical teams when we will put it in place. If it's not the case, refactor it, and do not be afraid to make mistake. It's into this way that we learn, that we enhance things. So do try to be the more specific possible according to your business, the risk, and so on, and involve your technical teams to validate that your expectations are correct, not correct, but very accurate in a way that everyone understands what you want to achieve. Okay.
Cool.
The one I'm curious what you think about that one, but every time I see least privilege, I tend to want to remove it. unless I can be very precise. I feel like it's a security principle that you should, make your team aware by education, but then it can be applied to so many things that putting it as a security requirement, I feel almost useless. So I personally tend to remove it unless I can specifically say for this use case, make it, I hate to see least privilege so generally put in security requirements, and I tend to remove that.
Yes. Okay, so I agree with all of you.
Good.
Except for Ray with his no info validation.
Yeah. That was shocking.
So those are all the questions at the back of the chapter, and that is chapter 2. And I'm wondering if my guests would like to do a roundtable with like a takeaway that they would be interested in sharing. Because someone's like, Nancy rocks 10,000%. I'm like, yep. And someone else is saying, very interesting, Dominique, then somehow security champions or Jedis should take part in the user design phase, right? I do believe security champions should take part.
Yes. In fact, the more profile you involve into your user story, the more you will be exchanged, and the more people will understand when you want to go. And if you explain to people and you exchange where you want to go and what you want to achieve, it will be the more clear for the people, and it will be okay. So for me, if you have a security champion, it will be your contact point and will be in charge of help the dev team to implement the requirements that you want to achieve, and raise to you some concern. For example, it's too generic. I do not understand what you want to achieve. Or be careful, if you want to do this, we need to spend time or research and development to find a way, find a new lib, or ask to the architecture team to implement a new component in the framework, and so on. So yes, and yes.
Dominique, do you want to start with doing the key takeaway or anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
I will say this year it's the 10 years that I do AppSec, and I have a dream. In a way that every developer, every ops people that I have a chance to work with are amazing. And the things that for me miss into the security is into the requirement, because often I see dev and ops teams that are amazing, that want to learn, to do the best way to achieve more highest level. I see security people that want to do his best. I see many people want to do his best, but I think the requirement is the start. It's the starting point. In fact, the requirement is the first point into the life of a future application. So do not be afraid. I understand that is a matter of budget and so on, but take time to put into your requirement, user story, and so on, the security requirements that you want to achieve in an explicit way. If you don't know, ask help to your security team. And my dream is to see security team more that provide more actionable way and more I will say more technical, but more technical in a way that provide useful stuff to the dev and ops team. Like for example, code snippet, CI/CD configuration, profile, and so on. And in order to really provide helpful material to the team, and don't be afraid to do mistake. As I have already said, a few months ago, I have provided a code snippet for a customer. My colleagues won't break my code in one hour because I have put the mess into the cryptographic. So do not be afraid to make mistake. But security guys provide useful information for your dev and ops team.
Cool. Who wants to go next?
Go ahead,
I
Ray.
guess I'll go. Yeah. I'll say for my takeaway from, I guess, this chapter is that there's a lot of resources out there. Tanya has her security check requirements list that she linked. ASVS, like, figure out what your company does, right? Like, what your company does, and then modify those requirements that are out there to fit the needs of your company and the maturity level that you're currently at. Yes, you would like to have requirements saying that you want to be 100% secure all the time, but that's just impossible. So, like, be realistic on what your devs can actually achieve, and don't try to overburden them. Some companies are more mature than others, and some companies can handle the full ASVS and others can't. So take out the ones that you can handle, the requirements you can handle from any of the checklists that are available, and kind of make it your own. And then as your company gets more mature in their AppSec practice, add more. And like, if you have to start out with like the OWASP top 10 as your security requirements, start out with OWASP top 10. Something is better than nothing, right? So, yeah, that's about all I have to rant about.
That's awesome. Nancy?
Yeah, well, similar. Basically, I'll go with the CISSP line where security is at the service of the business, right? Where we serve the business, so you don't put security requirement that your business doesn't need. So use those statement of sensitivity, use those use case, use those user stories to inform your choices of security requirements. You can't pick security requirements if you don't have that information and to have this discussion. And if you're doing it, there's probably something wrong, right? And yeah, from what we've said today, I think understanding the context. Context is really, really important, and being informed and communicating as well. And to Dominique's point, and I've been in that situation, and that's how I got involved with OWASP. I'm someone in government. I'm not a dev, right? And I'm the person with those checklists, giving them away. And people... So I, in the last, 5 years, have been basically building my empathy by understanding those security requirements and understanding what I'm asking for and why are they fighting back. And, I'll never be a dev, and I try to always explain to them that they are the expert, and to say, well, I have these requirements, and this is why I know about them, and how can you help me meet them? And sometimes it's not very prescriptive. It's, here's the goal, right? Here's what I'm trying to achieve, and let them choose, because you're the expert. Let them choose how to achieve that, and let's work together to make sure that it actually achieves the goal of the requirement. So as a person who's not technical, because I've been doing governance work most of the time, that's something that's been helpful. And that's the problem sometimes. It's people give requirements because they don't understand them, and it's hard to have a conversation and if you're feeling defensive and you don't know what you're doing, you're just kind of like, you have to do this or else you can't do it. But sometimes it's just misunderstanding, and taking the time to understand and to build that empathy, I think, is important. That's mine.
Gosh, I wish when I worked in the government, I got to work with a Nancy instead of some of the people who told me I was a dumb dev because I had made a vulnerability in my app when I'd had no education, no training, no guidance, no requirements, no nothing. And it's like, just having like the smallest amount of empathy from the security person would have been so nice.
Yeah, but you start that way, right? Like I started out with, as well, being defensive and kind of like, well, that's what it says, so you should do it. But a friend of mine, like Sharif Kousas, who's the OWASP Ottawa chapter leader, he always tells me, I think once per year, he's like, devs are really smart, Nancy. Every time I bitch about something, he's like, they are actually really smart. I'm like, I know. So he always reminds me, yeah, damn it. Like, it reminds me that, they want to do the right thing, and they're actually really, really smart. So take that into account, and before complaining, or when you give your advice, remember that. And that's really great advice from him. Yeah.
I agree. Also, hi Sharif, if you're watching.
Yes.
We think you're great.
I quote him all
Sharif
the time.
he'll be on a later show, so I'm pretty excited that we're foreshadowing.
It'll be a great show.
Gary says, this is great to hear from the panel. As Tanya says, too many security people are what Gary calls security dentists, where what you do is just never good enough. It's true. They're like, you need to floss 25 times a day, Tanya. Once a day is not enough. I'm like, that's it. I'm just going to throw the floss away. So my key takeaway that I want to give is that the requirements that I gave in the book, I feel are kind of bare minimum if you want to go on the internet. So if you do read the book, this is the section where it's like what you must know to write code safe enough to put on the internet. I feel that if you can't meet these requirements, you need to go back and work a little more and reevaluate your project, because if you want to, the internet's not a safe place. It's really not. And if you're a security person, you know. And so I love the ideas that were put forth by my amazing guests. And I hope if you are watching that you consider reading the rest of the books, coming to the rest of the streams, follow all these awesome humans on the social medias and read their blog, or in Dominique's case, check out the OWASP cheat sheets project that he worked on for so many years. If you want to follow Nancy, like, she's on LinkedIn, but go to the OWASP DevSecOps show. It's awesome. And then I feel, because I said read Ray's blog, I should mention again, it's Hella Secure. So HELLA dash secure. And then is it .com? Yeah.
Yeah, it's .com. And
Perfect.
I think I'm going to be on the Nancy show as a helper. Yes.
As a host.
Yeah, this month, and then I'm on your show next month again, talking about secure design.
And just so everyone knows, OWASP DevSlop is spelled OWASP, and then new word DevSlop, like sloppy DevOps, DEVSLOP. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that came. Thank you for the amazing conversation in the chat. Thank you to my guests for taking time out on a Saturday. I appreciate all of you. And I really, really appreciate you sharing all your amazing ideas, knowledge, and experience. Thank you. I'm Tanya Janka, and next month, on May 15th, we will be covering Chapter 3, which is Secure Design. We're going to have a bunch more guests, and I look forward to seeing you there. Again, May 15th, Chapter 3, Secure Design. Thank you.